Alright, I'm left alone for a little bit so I can actually have my microphone on. I think I'm going to catch up on some Animus database shit. Read through some of these. God, I have a shitload I'm behind on. Let's start with present day. DDS genetic memory export, subject Peroto Calderon, 1 out of 4, date 1498, location Agnadello, I think. My order keeps an artifact in Agnadello, one of the powers I cannot explain. If it can heal my child, I will travel any distance. I will need a horse, but I cannot return to the convent to retrieve my own. I pull a soldier from his saddle and challenge him for his mount. I chose a dangerous victim. This man is skilled with a longsword. I take note of the man's armor and exploit his weakness. A swift boot to his crotch drops his guard. We lock blades, and he pushes me to the ground. I barely dodge his next move by throwing dirt into his eyes. We are starting to draw a crowd. I must end this soon. He parries my attack and returns with a thrust to my chest, yet he manages to draw blood. The soldier is my equal, but my desperate tactics best him. I take his horse and return for my son. Someday I will repay Eula's kindness, but first I must finish what I have started. I secure my child and set out for Agnadello. DDS genetic memory export, subject Peroto Calderon, 2 out of 4, date 1498, location Agnadello. I knew we were being chased, but I had hoped for more time. We have only made it as far as Firenze, but I will have to stop to plan an ambush. Alexander's men will be here soon. I leave my horse in an alcove and bring my son to hide in the forest, my bow ready. The baby cries. I put an arrow through the back of one man's head before he can turn to face me. One of the soldiers, probably the leader, has remained on his horse. I shoot an arrow into its flank. The beast hurls its rider from his saddle and tramples him. They return fire. I hear the arrows rip through the foliage around me, but none manage to come close enough to worry me. My arrow goes wide. I correct my aim, and the follow-up hits. At first, I believe I have missed my mark, but my arrow has nearly buried itself in my target. The rest of Alexander's hunting party turns tail. I have spooked them, but for how long? I am back on the road immediately. Push my horse hard. DDS genetic memory export, subject Peroto Calderon, 3 out of 4, date 1498, location Agnadello. My brothers have traveled from Agnadello to greet me, swords drawn. They know why I'm here. They will not allow me to use the shroud. None shall stand in my way. Vincenzo, it seems, only yesterday we trained together. I try to wound him, but he is not holding back. He exposes his side, and I react. I will mourn him later. Why do they face me one at a time? Together they could easily take me. One of the recruits sweeps low and I swing high. I have left him with a horrible scar, but he may survive. I hear the soft click of a wrist blade and immediately thrust behind me. My sword connects with an assassin moving in for the kill. The thrown knife digs into my shoulder. I shudder as I pull it out and hurl it back into its owner's right eye. I leave my brothers either dead or disabled and continue. There is no returning to the Order, no returning to Roma, only Agnadello. DDS genetic memory export. Subject Peroto Calderon, 4 out of 4. Date 1498. Location Agnadello. My enemies will come in greater numbers if my brothers do not reach me first. I give my life for my sons gambling everything upon a legend. Where I am empty in faith, I am filled with desperate hope. So beautiful. It is a plain thing, carefully folded inside a simple wooden box, but it is also so much more. It speaks inside my head. I feel that it wants to heal my wounds. No, I am here for my son. I wrap his tiny body in the shroud. Flawed material, it tells me. I tell it he is not flawed, but it insists. I order to heal him. I feel as though my head will burst. It takes all my concentration to keep from blacking out. My son screams. I have to force myself to leave him in the cloth. What chance does he have without it? I cradle my baby, wrapped in the shroud. It is humming an eerie song, and the voice in my head matches its tune. Your pain is temporary, ignore it, it demands. Does not understand that he is a mere infant. I remove my son from the shroud. He is no longer crying. He looks up at me with glossy eyes, and I wonder if he truly has been healed. Has this been worth the pain I have caused? I return the shroud to its box and leave. Have a drink. Okay. Miscellaneous. Events. Crimean War. And perhaps the pettiest reason to start a war since the Americans got a bit shirty over our borrowing of their sailors in 1812, the Crimean War 1853 to 1856 began as a disagreement over whether Catholic or Orthodox Christians should control the churches in the Holy Land. Of course, it was really whether Britain or Russia was allowed to have the bigger empire, but we don't talk about that in polite society. Casus Belli was when Napoleon III sent a warship into the Black Sea to politely suggest that the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Mesin I, crazy name, crazy guy, acknowledged French Catholicism as the authority over the Christian sites in the Holy Land. This rather annoyed Tsar Nicholas I, since up till this point the Eastern Orthodox Church had controlled those sites, and he responded by sending two corps to the banks of the Danube. Diplomatic relations soared. Bleh, cannot think. Diplomatic relations soared from there, and since the British and the French were leery of the Russian expansionism and had troops in the area anyways, they decided they might as well pitch in on the Ottoman side. As you expect from the name, most of the conflict was fought in the Crimea, with the Russian Empire on one side and the alliance of the Britain, France, and Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia on the other. It was also one of the first truly modern wars. If large masses of men shooting each other over which Toff got to call themselves emperor of what wherever it can be called modern. Technology like the exploding artillery shell, the railroad, and the telegraph shaped the conflict, and the advent of photographic technology meant it was one of the first wars to be documented in the press. This was particularly delightful in that the great legacy of the Crimean War was the rank incompetence and general mismanagement on the part of the leadership of all sides. Something to really be proud of there. If you're going to be inept, be really inept, for the citizens on the home front puffed up with patriotic fervor. This was a bit like going to see your favorite band in a concert only to realize that they sounded good thanks to autotune and ruthless editing. The war ended in 1856 when the Allies took the key Russian city of Sevastopol. Recognizing the inevitability of defeat, Nicholas I sued for peace, and as part of the terms of the Black Sea was declared neutral. Moldavia and Wallachia were made independent, and everyone more or less tried to forget the entire embarrassing debacle. It did lead to the extensive calls for the military reform and the nationalist movement across Eastern Europe, which doesn't quite seem worth the lives of 500,000 people, but what do I know? Battle of Balaclava. On 24 October 1854, the Allied forces of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire had settled in for a long winter siege of the Russian port of Sevastopol. The British, under Lord Raglan, took Balaclava and the right flank of the siege. This was a problem because the British didn't actually have manpower to hold the right flank. See Crimean War. Rampart incompetence. Sensing weakness, Russian forces charged the British defenses and managed to capture several redoubts and their artillery pieces. It was major, though not ultimately significant, victory for the Russians, but the battle is most famous for that paean. I feel really stupid today. To incompetent leadership and senseless loss of life that is the charge of the Light Brigade. I'm sure you've read the poem, and if not, for God's sake, go read a book. Cannon to the left of them, cannon to the right of them, etc. There were a lot of cannon. That is the point. The whole thing is fraught with ambiguity and recrimination on all sides, but broadly, here's how it happened. Lord Raglan, the overall commander of the British forces, gave the order to Lord Lucan, who commanded the cavalry forces, to send the Light Brigade to harry the Russian forces who had seized the artillery positions on the south side of the battlefield. Unfortunately, the courier who brought the order to Lord Lucan didn't deliver the information clearly enough, and Lord Lucan ordered Lord Cardigan, who commanded the Light Brigade and was incidentally Lucan's brother-in-law and who hated him intensely, to charge the fortified Russian artillery position at the end of the valley. If you're beginning to notice a common theme of Lord this and Earl of such and such massively cocking up the operations, you've hit the key problem with allowing bored aristocrats to buy officers' commissions. At any rate, despite the order making as much sense as a strip naked and dance the Argentine tango with the side of the Russian guns to demoralize the enemy, Lord Cardigan duly led his men into the teeth of the enemy artillery. The net result was that the Light Brigade suffered roughly 40% casualties. The Russians were very confused, and Lord Cardigan, upon seeing the battle was lost, buggered off back to his private yacht for steaks and champagne. It was that sort of war. Corrupt Practices Act. Interesting little picture. Rigging elections was a national pastime of the 19th century Britain, and by 1868 things had gone so bad that it wasn't sporting anymore. Thus, Prime Minister Disraeli introduced this bill in order to make the process interesting again. This bill's principal effect was to transfer responsibility for trying election petitions from, you know what? Let's slow down and back up a bit. Prior to this act, whenever the result of the parliamentary election was up for debate, the result was decided by a vote of the House of Commons. Shockingly enough, this meant that 9 times out of 10, the candidate from the majority party turned out to have won the election after all. Disraeli's new law moved responsibility for deciding the election outcomes to a special triumvirate appointed from the Court of Common Pleas. The Exchequer of Pleas, or the Queen's Bench, which meant that to rig an election you now had to buy up 2 judges instead of the entire House of Parliament, a much more sensible, streamlined system of corruption. It's this slow, steady march towards efficiency that make British government the finest in the world. Just gotta check some messages really quick. And I have nothing important. We have 11. Okay. Have a drink. Okay, got that. Paradise done. We'll go to collectibles next. Sean's Fun Beer Tasting Notes. Let's see. Brian's Renegade. Pale Ale at Alistair Benedict Brewers. Sean's Tasting Notes. Pours a clear, bilious yellow color. I've never actually seen a color I described as bilious before now, but that's what Alistair Benedict Brewers seem to be aiming for, and by God they've nailed it. Rotten grain dominates the flavor profile, which is an unusual choice, balanced by the musty, flaky funkiness reminiscent of the water that pools at the bottom of a poorly drained gym shower, and not a nice, clean, modern fitness center either. One of those sweaty, concrete monstrosities from the 1970s in somewhere like Loughborough, where a large man with broken noses gather outside with large dogs to poke fun at patrons leaving in neon gym wear. It's got a little skull on it. Double Stout, Sean's Tasting Notes. It's kind of a cool bottle. It's got a star. When one stout absolutely will not do, this one starts strong with a nose reminiscent of fag ends and burnt bacon, but surprises with the taste of hot mud. A cheeky afternote of coal fire rounds out the overall flavor profile, and I can best summarize as London sweatshop. Just trying to identify the ingredients has put me on several bioterror watch lists. Fry and fry. Got a little crow or something on it. Limited, Sean's Taste Notes. Are you sure this is meant to be drunk? Are you sure this is meant to be drunk? Because it tastes for all the world like a new concoction for Evie and Jacob's poison darts. Gun and Sons Scotch Ale. Couple little guns on it. 1868. 1868, Edinburgh. Sean's Tasty Notes. When I think back on all the hardship England had inflicted on our neighbors to the north, all the wars, the oppositions, the outlawing of the kilt, I'm fairly sure this beer pays them all back with interest. This isn't a beer. This is a declaration of war in liquid form. This is like being struck about the head with a caber and similar Scottish cliches. I'm going to have a bit of a lie down and a good long think about my life choices now. R. White's Table Ale. A little anchor on it. 40 years unrivaled. London. Sean's Taste Notes. Note that this bottle doesn't specify what it's unrivaled at. My guess is accidental poisonings. As a point of interest, I compare this sense of memory profile to others in our database. And do you know there's only one point of differentiation between this beer and having your face shoved into a public toilet in Kettering? The toilet water is slightly more pure. Red Growler. Got a little buggy there. Special brewed. Sean's Taste Notes. Here's a fun beer fact for you. Cask conditioned beers are often treated with isinglass, which is a substance obtained from dried swim bladders of cod in order to clarify the brew and remove particulates like spent yeast. In the case of the Red Growler Special Brewed, I think we'd all have been happier skipping the beer altogether and just chewing on the dried fish bladder. Ew. Robert Barnaby and Amber Ale. Anco Amber Ale. Special Brewed, Fermented, Gloucester. Sean's Tasting Notes. With a strong flavor and heady aroma, this beer would pair wonderfully with halibut. I'm sorry, did I say pair with? I meant taste of. It tastes of halibut. The body has an unctuous pond scum quality, but manages to be gritty at the same time. Overall, I'd rather this beer somewhere between Poison Oak and a live and furious piranha are the things I'd willingly put in my body scale. Sons of Adam Irish Stout. I think that's like a leaf or something on there. Irish Brewers Dublin Stout. Sean's Tasting Notes. Presumably named because the ingredients have been sitting about since roughly the days of Enoch. A proper Irish stout should be pitch black, creamy in texture, with a rich yet subtle notes of coffee and toasted malt. This tastes like someone watered down a pot of roofing tar, then spiked the whole thing with burning tires. The mouthfeel is akin to licking a greasy rat, and how I know that is a story I will not be telling you. I shared the sense memory profile with a mate of mine from Cork, and he actually burst into flames. Please don't send any more data on this one. Thames Brewery Pale Ale, London, 1868. Got a little ship on it. Sean's Tasting Notes. There is a very easy joke to be made here about the purity of the Thames. Excuse me, I had a little cough there. There's a very easy joke to be made here about the purity of the Thames as compared to the quality of this beer, but I'm not going to make it. No, such an obvious jab doesn't do true justice to the vileness of this drink. On every level which is it possible to enjoy beer, this one is a spectacular fail. It tastes like the inside of carburetor. It looks like something my Uncle Rory had drained from the growth on his foot, and the smell. Well, just be thankful Abstergo hasn't added smell-o-vision technology to the Helix interface yet. I loaded this up with one of the old Animus 3.0 rigs, and now everything smells of bin juice. I think I need a CAT scan. The Blind Goose. Bethune and Sons Mild Ale, London, England. Sean's Tasting Notes. The mild ale, brewing equivalent of a beige carpet or a smooth jazz album. Looking back on the log files, I'm quite certain I synchronized a particular sense memory, but I'll be buggered if I can remember anything about it. It's like an unmemory, a flavor that is defined only by its absence. It's almost poetic in its way. Shame, it really only suitable for a sale to children or American supermarkets. Looks like there wasn't really much here Sean liked. I think I might have saw one or two. That's one of my favorite ones. Her Majesty Must Hate You. But Yeah, I got all the beer now. What next? Pressed flowers. Anemone hepatica, forsaken. Anemone was a nymph, beloved by Zephyr. Flora, jealous of her, banished her from the court and transformed her into a flower that blows before the return of spring. Zephyr had abandoned this unhappy beauty to the rude caresses of Boreas, who, unable to gain her love, harshly shakes her, half opens her blossoms, and causes her immediately to fade. The language of flowers. Broom. Spartium jungium? Humility. In the year 1234, St. Louis of France, after the coronation of his queen, chose the flower of this plant and the insignia of a new order of knighthood. The members of the order wore a chain composed of flowers of the broom entwined with the white enameled lilies, from which was suspended a gold cross with the inscription, Exaltet humilis, he exalteth the humble. The language of flowers. China pink. Dianthus chinensis, pure love. Florists designated two principal divisions of these flowers, pinks and carnations. Spencer, who was remarkable for his care in retaining the old manner of spelling, calls these flowers coronations. Bring heather, the pink and the purple columbine with jelly flowers. Bring coronations to sops in wine worn of paramours, the language of flowers. Daffodils. Narcissus major. Self-love. The ancients attributed the origin of this flower to the metamorphosis of the beautiful youth named Narcissus, who, having slighted the love of the nymph Echo, became enamored of his own image, which he beheld in a fountain, and pined to death in consequence. The language of flowers. Dwarf geranium. Geranium, bright charity, steadfast piety. The language of flowers. Forget me not. Kinoglossum omphalodus, forget me not. It is related to that young couple on the eve of being united, whilst walking along a delightful banks of the Danube, saw a cluster of these lovely flowers floating in the stream, which was bearing it away. The affianced bride admired the beauty of the flower and lamented its fatal destiny. The lover plunged into the water to secure it. No sooner had he caught it than he found himself sinking, but making a last effort, he threw it on the bank at the feet of his betrothed, and at that moment disappeared forever, exclaiming, Virgus mein Nike. Since that event, this flower has been made emblematical of the sentiment and has been distinguished by the names of Forget Me Not, the language of flowers. Gum cistus Landiniferus, one of the more ornamental, hardly, excuse me, one of the most ornamental hardy shrubs we possess, at once pleasing to the eye and grateful to the smell. For, as Miller observes, the whole plant in warm weather exudes a sweet, gluttonous substance, which has a very strong balsamic scent, and the perfume, the circumambient air to the great distance. Its blossoms, which appear in June and July in great profusion, exhibit a remarkable instance of quickly fading beauty, opening and expanding to the morning sun, and before the night stewing the ground with their elegant remains, as each succeeding day produces new blossoms. This dispositions of the petal, common to the genus, is less to be regretted. The Botanical Magazine, Volume 4. Jonquil, Narcissus jonquilla, desire, the jonquil, which came to us from Constantinople, is with the Turks the emblem of desire, the language of flowers. Laurestinus, viburnum tenus, I die if neglected. This pretty plant, which is a gift from Spain, is the ornament of our shrubberies in winter, appearing in the full leaf and flower at the time other plants are stripped of theirs. Neither the scorching breath of summer nor the cold blast of winter can despoil it of its charms. At the same time, assiduous, I am illiterate today. Care is necessary to preserve it. The emblem of the constant and delicate friendship it always seeks to please, but dies if neglected. The language of flowers. Lily. Lilium Chalcedonium, Majesty, the lily's height bespake command, a fair imperial flower, she seemed designated for Flora's hand, the scepter of power, the language of flowers. Love in a mist, devil in a bush. Nigella Damascena, I think this flower was mentioned specifically earlier in the game. May be propagated by sowing the seeds upon a bed of light earth, where they are to remain, for they seldom succeed well if transplanted. Therefore, in order to have them intermixed among the annual flowers in the borders of the flower garden, the seeds should be sown in the patches of the proper distances, and when the plants come up, they must be thinned where they grow too close, leaving but 3 or 4 of them in each patch, observing also to keep them clear from weeds, which is all the culture they require. In July, they will produce their flowers, and the seeds will ripen in August. The Botanical Magazine, Volume 1. Persian iris. Iris persica. A message. There are more than 30 species of irises, but bulbous and with other roots. From the brilliant and diversified colors resembling those of the rainbow, those beautiful flowers have been named after the messenger of the gods. It is well known that the fair irises was the bearer of good news only. The language of flowers. Snowdrop. Anemone sylvestris. Hope. The firstlings of the year may not aptly be considered an emblem of hope. Language of flowers. Strawberry. Fragaria monophylla. Perfection. This humble plant delights in the shelter of the woods and covers the borders with the delicious fruit, which belongs to anyone who pleases to gather it. The language of flowers. Now I'm going with strawberries. Sunflower. Helanthian Anise, false riches. The sunflower has been made the emblem of false wealth. Because gold, however abundant, cannot itself render a person truly rich, it is related to the Pythus, a rich Lydian, the owner of the several gold mines, neglected and cultivation of his lands, which naturally became the unproductive as not to afford the necessities of life. The language of flowers. Yellow day lily, Hemerocallis flava, coquetry, coquetry. This fragile beauty is made the emblem of coquetry because its flower seldom lasts a second day. The language of flowers, yellow lupine, lupinus luteus. The present, with many other species of lupine, is very generally cultivated in flower gardens for the sake of variety, being usually sown in the spring of other annuals, where the flower borders are spacious. They may with propriety be admitted, but as they take up much room and their blossoms are of short duration, they are not desirable as many other plants. It is native of Sicily, the flowers of June and July, the Botanical Magazine, Volume 4. Drink. Okay. Okay, looks like I'm caught up in the flowers. Check something. It's based on my YouTube video. Cannot watch that right now. Illustrations. A communist clubroom near Leicester Square. Guy smoking kind of his position weird. Casting a cylinder from the new Albert Bridge in Chelsea. Looks like they're at a forge. A street in Rowan. Interesting how the architecture was set up back then. Which I know many of those buildings are still standing, but still interesting. The astronomers are waiting for the eclipse. Position weird. Wall of Romulus, Porta Magonia, Palatine Hill. Guy's just striking a pose. Specus of Aqueduct in the Catacomb of St. Priscilla. 1,000,000 of money. So she's supposed to be holding money or bucks or a book? I don't know, but the guy want to point at it. The Bank of Parlor. Very roomy. Fruit sellers going to Jerusalem. Vestibule of the French National Assembly of Versailles. Very crowded. The Mousetrap. Those are some very frightening smiles. 24. Queen Elizabeth attire for the Royal Thanksgiving on the defeat of the Spanish Armada. That is a big dress. Patience and determination. Front lady is scary. The Oxford and Cambridge boat race and old varsity oar. What's he climbing? Like they're layered on each other. The Festival of the Highland Society, the health of Duke of Rothesay with Highland honors. Kilts. While standing on the chairs, feet on the table. My mother would murder me. 43. A picture of a sales in Paris. Oh, I read the other one. Instruction of pauper children in the South Metropolitan District School, Sutton. Is that kid in the back missing half his arm? Okay, caught up on those. Royal correspondences. April 29th, 1865, to Miss Lincoln. Dear Madame, though a stranger to you, I cannot remain silent when so terrible a calamity has fallen upon you and your country, and must express personally my deep and heartfelt sympathy with you under the shocking circumstances of your present dreadful misfortune. No one can better appreciate than I can, who am myself utterly broken-hearted by the loss of my own beloved husband, who was the light of my life, my stay, my all, what your sufferings must be, and I earnestly pray that you may be supported by him to whom alone sorely stricken can look for comfort in this hour of heavy affliction. With a renewed expression of true sympathy, I remained, dear madam, your sincere friend, Victoria R. January 22nd, 1866. To Earl Russell. The Queen can assure Lord Russell that he need be under no apprehension of her not arriving in the time for the opening of the Parliament. If she has the whole Monday open, she can go when she likes, and with Alberta she has no longer cause to fear a bad passage. To enable the Queen to go through what she can only compare to an execution, it is of importance to keep the thought of it as much on from her mind as possible, and therefore the going to Windsor to wait 2 whole days for this dreadful ordeal to do would do her positive harm. The Queen has never till now mentioned this painful subject to Lord Russell, but she wishes once and for all to just express her own feelings. She must, however, premise her observations by saying that she entirely absolves Lord Russell and his colleagues from any attempt ever to press upon her what is so very painful an effort. The Queen must say that she does feel very bitterly the want of feeling of those who ask the Queen to go to open Parliament, that the public should wish to see her she fully understands, and has no wish to prevent. Quite the contrary, but why this wish should be of so unreasonable and unfeeling nature as to long to witness the spectacle of poor broken-hearted widow, nervous and shrinking, dragged in the deep mourning, alone in state as a show, where she used to go supported by her husband to be gazed at without delicacy of feeling, is a thing she cannot understand, and she never could wish her bitterest foe to be exposed to. She will do it this time as she promised it, but she owns she resents the unfeelingness of those who have clamored for it, of the suffering which it will cause her. Nervous as she is now, she can give no idea, but she owns she hardly knows how she will go through it. Were the queen a woman possessed of strong nerves, she would not mind going through the painful exhibition, but her nerves, from the amount of anxiety and the constant unceasing work which is quite overwhelming her, as well as her deep sorrow, and terribly and increasingly shaken, and she will suffer much for some time after. From the shock of her nervous system which this ordeal will occasion, it is hard when she works and slaves away all day and till late at night not to be spared at least such trials. May 22nd, 1867. Dearest Bertie, these lines will be given to you on my birthday with the insignia of the Order of the Thistle, which I know you wished much to have, and which therefore I wish to give you on my poor old sad birthday. Once so happy and bright, I hope it will be quite a surprise to you. I mean to give Arthur, who is now 17, the Garter on the same day. I would also have given Affy the office of Constable of the Round Tower, but his home is not properly in England, and the income is of no consequence to him. I shall give it to poor Victor, and would ask you to tell him, in my name, saying to him at the same time that I thought he ought now to be very prudent and not to embark on any speculation. You should impress this strongly upon him. As Lynchen and Christian live at Frogmore, I mean to make Christian ranger of the Windsor Park, which will give him some pleasant occupation and to be helped by Jenner Seymour, but it will make no difference whatever as to the shooting, which remains entirely in my hands and under my direction. V.R. June 26, 1867. To Lord Charles Fitzroy. Lord Charles Fitzroy, having always been so kind to the Queen in all that concerns her convenience and comfort, and having only lately informed her that the Duke of Beaufort so completely understood her wishes and entered into her feelings respecting her faithful Brown, and having also her last year that the people quite understood his goings on as an upper servant with her carriage, and he, Lord Charles, thinking there should be no difference in London to the country, and moreover having taken him everywhere with her for 2 years on public as well as the private occasions, she is much astonished and shocked at the attempt of being made by some people to prevent the faithful servant going with her to the review in Hyde Park, therefore making the poor nervous shaken queen, who is accustomed to the watchful care and intelligence, terribly nervous and uncomfortable. Whatever can be done, the queen does not know on this occasion, or what it all means she does not know. But she would be very glad if Lord Charles would come down tomorrow morning any time before the luncheon, that she may have some conversation with him on the subject, not so much as to view as to what can be done on this occasion, but as to what can be done for the future to prevent her being teased and played with the interference of others, and moreover to make it completely understood once and for all that her upper Highland servant, whether it be Brown or another, in the case he should be ill replaces him, belongs to her outdoor attendance on the state as well as the private occasions. The Queen will not be dictated to or made to alter what she has found to answer for her comfort, and looks to her gentlemen, and especially her equerries, setting this right for the future, whatever may be done on the single occasion. If when Lord Charles arrives he would first go to Countess Blucher, he will have to hear from her what has passed. October 14th, 1867, from the Queen's Journal. General Grey asked to see me when I came in, and said he was sorry to alarm me, but he must show me a telegram from Mr. Hardy, reporting that the mayor of Manchester had informed him, having the news from the reliable source, that the Fennons had said they meant to try and seize me here, and they were starting today or tomorrow. Too foolish. Mr. Hardy added that the special precautions should be taken, so General Grey asked me to be allowed to send at once a detachment of troops from Aberdeen, 93rd Highlanders, to be placed at Abergeldy, but letting it appear as if it were tomorrow's ceremony. He has also asked for additional police. December 19th, 1867, from General Grey. General Grey presents his humble and most devout duty to your majesty. He has shrunk from with he has shrunk from with a reluctance beyond words to express from saying anything to alarm your majesty, and if he spoke on the subject yesterday, it was only in obedience to Mr. Hardy's opinion that he ought to do so. But in what he said yesterday, he said perhaps less than he ought to have done, for he feels that, with your view to your majesty's safety, it is absolutely necessary that your majesty should be under no delusion as to the designs which are harbored against your majesty, or as to the particular facility with which Osborne affords, in spite of the utmost watchfulness for carrying them into execution. Crimes such as those contemplated cannot easily be perpetrated in the crowded thoroughfares or where there is a large population, and the most unsafe places for your majesty at this moment are those where the population is most thin and scattered. General Grey says that with much pain and reluctance, for he knows how it will jar against your majesty's feelings and tend to disturb your majesty's comfort, but he would be utterly unworthy of the confidence your majesty has reposed in him if he hesitated now, even at the risk of incurring your majesty's displeasure in saying that he believes that the case for your majesty's precious safety requires. He shrunk yesterday from telling your majesty the full extent of the information received with respect of the designs against your majesty. He now sends your majesty's perusal the note he received from Mr. Hardy after he had seen him on Tuesday, and in answer to one that General Grey wrote to ask if he thought it necessary that your majesty should be informed on the designs against your majesty's person, he also sends a letter that he has this morning received from Mr. Hardy, as well as one from the Duke of Buckingham, corroborating with the information received at the Home Office, also one of the Duke of Cambridge enclosing an anonymous letter evidently written in good spirit, warning him from the designs against your majesty, which added they are only waiting for rendering the services of the military in and about London more immediately available from the event of incendiary files, which appears in the form of the outbreak most to be apprehended. Lord Derby had written thus far, and was about to bring under your majesty's notice the painful and alarming reports that had been received your designs against your majesty's person, when he received a letter from the General Grey informing him that he had felt it to be his duty not to shrink from laying before your majesty and the intelligence itself, which received from the first instance by the telegram from Lord Monk, has since been confirmed in several respects from the various quarters. As your majesty will see the Duke of Buckingham tomorrow, Lord Derby abstains from detailing the measures which your majesty's servants had taken guardian against a particular danger, as indicated, in which moreover the Grace has taken a prominent part. It is indescribably painful to him to acknowledge, even to him, that so fearful a crime had been contemplated, but disposes as he is to disregard mere rumors of such threatened atrocities against your majesty, or your majesty's servants, of which there has been abundance. He cannot shut his eyes to the conviction that such schemes are in serious contemplation, and that the determination of a few resolute and desperate men to effect them at the hazard of their own lives requires the utmost vigilance to defeat them, and given that may prove insufficient. Have a drink. Lord Derby would hardly venture to write thus openly if he were not aware your majesty is inaccessible, perhaps even if he may be permitted to say so, too much so to personal apprehension, but he trusts that he may be allowed most respectfully but most earnestly to represent that is the duty which your majesty owes the many millions of loyal subjects, not to expose the unnecessary risk of life and incalculably vulnerable to the country, and he cannot but concur with the opinion that he knows has been submitted by your majesty by General Grey, that the few places that could afford such facilities as Osborne to such a design as it is, he fears with too much truth entertained. Of course, as long as your majesty's pleasure is to remain there, every precaution that can be taken will be taken both by the land and the sea to provide you and your majesty's safety, but Lord Derby cannot withhold the expression of his own strong opinion that the primary object would be far better secured even in London, but still more at Windsor, and he would feel himself not openly not only deeply responsible for the public opinion, but personally criminal in his own conscience, if he shrank from submitting his view to your majesty, unpleasing as he knows it must be. In any case, Lord Derby would urge upon your majesty with all possible earnestness, at least so far to cooperate with those whose duty and affection alike prompt to watch over your majesty's safety, as to limit the hours of driving out as far as possible to daylight, and to be accompanied by the sufficient attendance to provide against a coup de main. The house at Osborne may, by extreme care, be protected, but your majesty's unattended late drivers afford an opportunity for desperate adventures against which no vigilance can effectually provide. Damn, that was a lengthy letter. That's probably the longest letter. Yeah, that's pretty damn lengthy. Whew. Okay. How's things, my wife wants to know. I am sitting here doing nothing but reading. Let's see. Move the wall art around. Got your new painting up. Put the three arts in the dining room behind the dining table in a pyramid display. Two on the bottom, one on top. Any area that really needed covered are too small to put those things on, as they are too large. See here, playing a game. There are things there. What time is that? Oh, that was 13 minutes ago. Move that so you can see the chat. Which nobody's here anyways. Okay. I want to do people or locations. I'd rather touch locations than people. Allies. Benjamin Disraeli. Date of birth 21st December 1804. A novelist, a dandy, and a man of practice in law, Benjamin Disraeli, albeit surprisingly, came to be one of Europe's leading statesmen. The first and thus far only Jewish-born Prime Minister of England, Disraeli became famous for shaping the modern Conservationist Party and for his feud with William Ewart Gladstone. Disraeli was born in London in 1804 to Isaac and Maria Disraeli. When Benjamin was 12 years of age, Isaac converted his family to the Angelic Church following the dispute with a local synagogue. Later, Benjamin would further anglicize his name from Disraeli to Disraeli when he went to work for Maples law firm in 1821. Those exact motivations are unknown. Possibly he got fed up for spelling it out for people. Before entering the House of Commons, Disraeli dipped his toe into the waters of both literature and the stock exchange. He was fortunate that it was only his toe too, because when he found himself both critical failure and massively in debt with suffering a nervous breakdown, still, despite it all, he finally found his way into the Parliament in 1837, gaining a seat in the Conservationist Party. It was during this period that he forged his lifelong rivalry with Gladstone. In 1839, Disraeli married Mary Ann Lewis for what was thought by many to be financial reasons, but the couple at least grew to love each other and remained bound until her death in 1872. Disney married me for money, Mary once stated, but if he had the chance again, he would marry me for love. Disraeli became the prime minister for the first time in 1868, but failed to win that year's election. He led the opposition to majority once again in 1874, becoming the prime minister for a second time with a reign lasting 6 years. Suffering from the gout and severe asthma, I have both, Disraeli died in 1881. Queen Victoria, with whom he had made good friends over the course of his political tenure, was distraught by his passing, but due to the royal protocol, was forbidden from attending his funeral. It just went everywhere. The hell? Okay. Agnes McBain. Okay, so have up to Queen Victoria to read then. Shit. Messing with my windows. Okay. Duleep Singh, date of birth 6 September 1838. The youngest son of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Duleep became the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire at the age of 5. When I was 5, I could barely tie my shoelaces, but it was for the worst of reasons. After 4 of his predecessors were assassinated, just not by, assassins. His mother, the Maharani Jindakur, briefly ruled this region, but after the First Anglo-Sikh War, she was imprisoned. Duleep would not see his mother again for 13 years. In April of 1849, Duleep Singh, aged 10, was placed in the care of Dr. John Logan, who did not invent logins, and at the age 15 was exiled to Britain. He was an English. Catch my words. I'm not used to commentating on my videos anymore, and I'm just kind of screwing up a lot here. Let's see, where was I? Take a breath and go. It was in England that he had befriended Queen Victoria, who went on to become the godmother of several of Duleep's children. But Duleep never forgot his real mother, and in 1856 he attempted to contact her. His correspondence and emissaries were intercepted by the British in India. However, he persisted, and with the help of Logan, was allowed to meet her in January of 1861. The Maharani was deemed no longer a threat to the British interests in India and allowed to return with Duleep to the United Kingdom. In the 2 years before she died, she taught her son about his Sikh heritage. Duleep would spend the rest of his life attempting to return there. I'm assuming he never did. Mary Ann Disraeli, she was a character. Date of birth 11 November 1792. Mary Ann Disraeli, nee Vinnie, Viscountess Beaconsfield, was a prominent figure in the British high society throughout much of the 19th century. She married Benjamin Disraeli in 1839, shortly after her husband passed away, and was a constant companion, friend, and advisor until the day she died. Hither affectionate of a silly, scatterbrained demeanor, and penchant for saying the sort of thing that made proper Victorians waggle their mustaches disapprovingly, masked a keen political mind, and between the two of them it was joked that Benjamin married her for money, but do it again for love. This is rather more charming if you realize that Mary Ann was quite skint when they were married. It should be noted, though, that Disraelis, both of whom were romantics at the core, had a rather trying marriage at first. Benjamin hid his extensive debts from her for years, and both felt the sting of the public disapproval. The Victorian tabloids made today's bat boy sightings and illegitimate alien love children look downright reputable. Rather than wallow in the misery, as is the English way, the pair once again flouted convention by working out the problems and strengthening their relationship until the marriage became the storybook romance of which they had both dreamed. In 1868, when Queen Victoria wanted to raise the Disraeli to the nobility, and he preferred to stay in the House of Commons, Mary Ann leapt upon the proverbial grenade and was dubbed Viscountess Beaconsfield. As ever, she made ways for her refusal to abide by the acceptance standards of Victorian society. At court, her outfit frequently outdid the Queen's, and once she joined the ranks of the nobility, she seized on every opportunity to show up the ladies who had once scorned her. Yet she was also active in many charitable causes, organizing aid for the less fortunate. She also put her keen political mind to work on the campaign trail, with her husband winning the hearts and minds through sheer baby kissing determination. By the time of her death, the Disraelis were celebrated throughout Britain as a shining example of the joy, contentment, and success a proper union could bring. Mary Ann Disraeli is buried along with her husband, who outlived her by several years, at the Church of St. Michael and All Angels in Hughenden, Buckinghamshire. Speaking of life, might message me. And she's not feeling well. She's with her mother right now. Okay. Queen Victoria, date of birth 24 May 1819. Victoria, full name Alexandria Victoria, was born in Kensington Palace in London. Her father was Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Strathearn, something like that, the fourth son of King George III, who both died at 1820. Victoria was raised by her German-born mother, Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, in a childhood that she later described as rather melancholy. Sounds magical. Victoria inherited the throne at the age of 18, and she later married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1840, because it's nice to keep things in the family. Their 9 children married into the royal and noble families across Europe, earning her the nickname the Grandmother of Europe, which is better than the nickname her cousin's wife. After Albert's death in 1861, Victoria plunged into a deep mourning and largely vanished from the public eye. However, her popularity recovered in the later years of her reign, which is the toughest of any British monarch or any female monarch in history. Her golden and diamond jubilees were times of public celebration. Victoria's reign, commonly referred to today as the Victorian era, was a time remembered not only for its massive expansion of the British Empire around the world, but also for its industrial, cultural, political, scientific, and military changes within the United Kingdom. Enemies. Crawford Starrick, main bad guy. Date of birth 18 August 1827. Crawford Starrick was born in the West End of London, the younger son of Robert Starrick, a wealthy but unladen businessman who had famously tripled the value of the family estate as a young man by investing in the heady early days of the railway mania. There's probably a magazine called Railway Mania, isn't there? The Stark boys were bred for competition. Throughout the early childhood, they wore neck and neck in academics and sports, almost as often as they wore at each other's necks. Boys through and through, their mother observed proudly, never suspecting anything darker beneath the surface. When Crawford was 12, boarding school provided an opportunity he at last had room to grow. He was ostracized by the house, sarcastically dubbed Lord Starrick for the airs he put on. In his private notebooks, he began to see humanity as divided into 2 strata, those who served and those who ruled. Naturally, he fell into the latter category. Recognizing that he would earn no friends at school, he settled instead for lackeys. He sharpened his charm to a fine point, hid his disdain from behind smiles and helpful words, until he could bend teachers and peers to his will. A natural gift for leadership, teachers would remark, shows great improvement. Young Crawford has come into his own. The feeling of power and control was addictive. Upon graduation, he modeled himself a railroad baron, and through smart purchasing and the strange disappearance of the competition, he rose to the top. With his larger fortune, he expanded into many different industries, also broadening his reach across London. He fell in love once and only once to a businesswoman as ruthless as he, but she refused to marry him. Crazy women, eh? Yeah. Had a dog hair in my mouth, gross. Go down. There we go. Lord Cardigan. He was a prick. Date of birth, 16 October 1797. Lieutenant General James Thomas Brudenell, 7th of Earl of Cardigan, stands as a shining example of British aristocracy circa the first half of the 19th century, which is to say he was a pompous, blustery git who never met a failure he couldn't buy his way out of, and liked to play at soldiers with very large guns and actual human lives, or as he might have called them, peasants. He grew up in Buckinghamshire in the lap of luxury, as his father inherited the earldom of Cardigan when young James was only 14. Despite being educated at some of the finest schools in England, he had never earned a degree. I can't find any record of when he joined the Templars, presumably because when you're born this rich and connected, the doctor removes a silver spoon from your gob, slaps you on the arse, hands you a cross pate ring, and sends you on your way. In 1818, he became a member of the Parliament for Marlborough, a small region of Wiltshire regrettably lacking in grizzled smoking cowboys, though if you're ever there, try a pint of Henry's at the Lamb, ask for Jackie. This was convenient as his cousin owned the borough. Not that stopped him from buggering off on the grand tour of Europe before taking a seat. Mine, after all, one can hardly let little things like governance or responsibility get in the way of gadding about with a Russian noblewoman. When he finally did take a seat, he was unremarkably parliamentarian and apparently an uproar unpopular one during the campaign in 1832, despite having spent some £20,000, which is £1,660,000 in today's money. He was assaulted and badly beaten in a rally. I suppose that's what happens when you loudly, frequently use phrases like reformist nonsense and preserving the ancient rights of the nobility when winning the hearts and minds of common folk. Having failed rather remarkably in politics, he turned his attention to the military, spurred on by his youthful admiration of Wellington's cavalry at Waterloo, and I suspect the love of all the pretty horses. He, and I swear I am not making this up, formed his own troop of horse to guard against the reformist uprising in yeah, Northamptonshire when the Northland's menace failed to emerge. He joined the Hussars, where over the course of a few years he bought his way up from the lieutenant rank to lieutenant general and command of the 11th Hussars. Along the way, he accumulated a court martial for reprehensible conduct, the dismissal from the army by King William himself, and a prosecution for illegal dueling, all of which he managed to have reversed or dismissed thanks to his family connections. When he was finally sent off to India to take command of the forces, he spent a year and a half meandering his way to the colony, only to arrive in time for a bit of tiger shooting before the 11th Hussars, who had been stationed there for several years, to be recalled to England. Lord Cardigan, he inherited the earldom in 1837, traveled separately abroad a private yacht, because of course he did. If I didn't think he was such a tit, I'd love him. Despite a long and illustrious career of absolute fappery, Cardigan is most famous for leading the charge against the Light Brigade in the Battle of Balaclava, although initial rumors suggested that he had absented himself from the battle altogether. It seemed he did not. He did, in fact, lead the charge, and from the front, no less. Whatever his faults, he certainly possessed that breed of personal courage that comes from the certainty that the world would never dare lay a hand on you. Mind you, he has also apparently never bothered to look back and to see that his men were being slaughtered, and upon realizing that the battle was lost, he retired to his private yacht for champagne dinner. So it's not as though he was seized by the spirit of gallantry. After the war, Cardigan returned to England, where he spent his retirement vigorously campaigning against reform and for his own recognition as hero of the Crimea. In his very slight defense, he did contribute a great deal to money to the veterans' charities, and toward the end of his life, he campaigned in the favor of the Reform Act of 1867. But since that law served chiefly to bring in the House of Commons under the dominance of upper classes, that strikes me more as Templar mechanisms than any sort of change of heart, but at least from him we get the cardigan sweater, beloved hipsters, and children's TV presenters the world over. Maxwell Roth. Here's one that want to kill kids and burn the theater. Date of birth unknown. Although there is no record of Maxwell Ross's existence, there is a story he likes to tell. He tells a tale of a boy named Oberon who was born and raised by the loving parents who acted in a traveling theater troupe. Here the boy learned to sing, dance, recite Shakespeare, and charm the masses. But times were tough on the nomadic thespians, and they turned instead to the life of crime in an attempt to make ends meet, thieving and defrauding between performances. With a reputation worsening as time went on and the emotional toll of the illegal lifestyle robbing them of their passion, the close knit group soon disbanded and parted ways. This broke the young Oberon's heart, though it fills mine with joy because I bloody hate nomadic thespians. In a vain attempt to console the boy, his parents assured him that there was always a reason for everything and moved with him to London. Unfortunately, even there they found themselves haunted by the ghosts of the past and thus unable to find steady work. Instead, the family lived on the streets, the boy in and out of workhouses. Wistfully regarding the rich families from afar, Oberon would often complain to his parents that life wasn't fair and again had told him that there was a reason for everything. I've heard that line and I fucking hate that line. One day he had enough in an attempt to recapture the happiness he had recalled from his days in the troupe. He assumed the name of Maxwell Roth and ran away to join the circus in whatever capacity they would allow. Under the big top he excelled, learning everything from acrobatics to boxing to the sleight of hand. When this new life went the way of the former, Maxwell did not let his failure get him down. Instead, he returned to London and set out to apply his skills to the criminal underworld. As the years went on, Roth and in and out of prison worked numerous jobs from street cleaner to gun for hire and gained a reputation as an extraordinary but dangerously uncontrolled bare knuckle boxer. Quite the CV so far. In his most emotionally charged moments, no other boxer could bring him down. Within a few years, his deadly combination of brains and brawn saw the network expand and his infamy grew. Some men worked for him, others simply owed him money, but all feared him. It is perhaps unsurprising, then, that he was soon sought out by the Templar Grand Master Crawford Starrick. Starrick offered Roth an incredible sum for his expertise and assigned him the training of 7 powerful soldiers that could lead a mighty gang and dominate the streets of London. Now, rich man, Roth bought and refurbished a burnt-out theater in the Strand. What is now called the Alhambra Music Hall. Roth made his this is base of operations, all the while maintaining a legitimate facade by funding shows for the public to enjoy. As his time under Stark's employment moves ever forward, Roth grows increasingly frustrated with Stark's control of his life, but he has learned to hope for a future of Stark's grasp, knowing that there may not be a reason for everything. Here we got groups. Other people. Richard Owen, date of birth 20 July 1804. Sir Richard Owen had never learned natural history in school growing up, which may have been his first mistake in life. He studied to become a surgeon at the University of Edinburgh, found work in the Hunterian Museum cataloging plant and animal specimens, and was elected to research the arm of the Zoological Society of London in 1830. He was the youngest and the most active member of the group, by which I mean, okay, I actually read this one already. So William Gladstone, date of birth 29 December 1809, known as the People's William by his supporters, which has to be one of the weirdest nicknames I've ever heard. The People's William. William Ewart Gladstone was a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, 4 times ranked one of the greatest Prime Ministers of all time. Born in Liverpool, young Willie was the fifth of the 6 children to Anne Mackenzie and Sir John Gladstone. He attended the Christ Church at Oxford, where he studied the mathematics and the classics, served the president of the Union Debating Society, and became an advocate for Toryism. Gladstone was elected to Parliament in 1832 in the House of Commons. He was a member of the High Toryism and opposed the abolition of slavery. Eek. Later, when slavery was abolished, he helped his father collect over £100,000 from the government for having owned over 2,000 slaves across 9 plantations in the Caribbean. During his time in the Parliament, he met and began to despise his lifelong rival, Benjamin Disraeli, appalled by his foppish attire. Whereas he excelled in the House of Commons, he struggles in his social life. Gladstone had a difficult time finding a wife after being rejected by both Caroline and Eliza Farquhar and Lady Frances Harriet Douglas, he met the charming Catherine Glynn. The two were later married and stayed together for 59 years until he passed away, because 59 years must have been tiring. In 1840, Gladstone took it upon himself to rescue and rehabilitate prostitutes, a practice he continued for the next several decades despite a backlash from his peers. After leaving and returning to the Parliament several times, Gladstone served as Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think. In 1859, the leader of the Liberal Party in 1868, he served his first premiership later that year in 1874, and then promptly retired, angry with Disraeli's changes during the retirement. He returned to the Parliament and served another 3 times as Prime Minister, 1880 to 1885, 1886, and 1892 to 1894. Unlike his rival, Gladstone was known for his poor relations with Queen Victoria. She was quoted as having complained about him, saying, "He always addresses me as if I were a public meeting." William Gladstone died of heart failure in old age in 1898 and was buried in Westminster Abbey. His wife later laid next to him after she died, too. Okay. Let's see. Catherine Gladstone. What a dumb hat. Date of birth, 6 January 1812. Standing beside her husband, Catherine Gladstone's life was not quite public, her father having died when she was only 3. Catherine and her siblings, Mary and Stephen, were raised by their mother. Catherine and Mary grew to be extremely close, getting married on the same day at the same venue, and Catherine acted like a mother to her children. When Mary passed away in 1857, Catherine met William Ewart Gladstone through her brother in 1834, and the two great people, as Mary had called the couple, married in 1839. The couple were together for 59 years before Gladstone's death in 1898, and she had 8 children together. Yikes. Though notoriously untidy, Catherine was a brilliant woman who devoted her life to improving the lives of others. Desmond. Not funny, universe, not funny at all. Geez, what do you find there? Sean's been locked in his room for hours. I can't find the whiskey, and I'm pretty sure I hear crying. But Desmond was kind of a funny choice for the dog name myself. Poor Sean. Prince Albert. That's a letter. Date of birth, 26 August 1816. When Queen Victoria first laid eyes on Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg of Gotha, it was love at first sight. Sure, they were cousins, but it was a different time. She asked for his hand in marriage in October 1839, and they were married in February the following year. The public was at first skeptical about the foreigner being made prince consort, fearing that Albert would have too much influence on Victoria. While Albert was by no means a malevolent figure, he did come to exert more and more power in the court, especially whenever Victoria was pregnant with one of their 7 children. He restructured their household staff, became an important player in Britain's foreign policy, and squeezed his way into the parliamentary ceremonies that had until then only required the presence of the Queen. As passionate as their love for each other was, Victoria pushed back against Albert's desire to become her sole advisor and the head of the family. By 1860, Albert's health had deteriorated significantly. He became physically weak and difficulty breathing, and could no longer eat. He was diagnosed with typhoid, a treatable disease at the time, but it was too late. He passed away on the 14th of December with his wife, the Queen, by his side. Okie dokie. Let's see. So we got locations. City of London. Oh. Looks like that's where a chunk of our entries are, our locations right now. As long as span of the working class were driven to the boroughs by the rich, the City of London became financial capital of the United Kingdom. City of London. Mansion House. For many of England's history, the Lord Mayor of London conducted municipal businesses out of their home in the Guildhall. Only in the aftermath of the Great Fire of 1666 did the idea come about to build a residence for all Lord Mayors, not all of them at once, mind you. A house full of Lord Mayors, that's a reality show waiting to happen. The architect George Danza the Elder, then the clerk of the city's work, was hired to design and build what would be called the Mansion House. Construction began in 1739, and the house wasn't completed until 1758. The first Lord Mayor to move into the Mansion House was Sir Crispin Gasco Gascoigne? Gasco, whatever. In 1752, while the house was still under construction, today the Mansion House serves as the Lord Mayor's residence office, as well as a site for business meetings and city functions, including the annual Mansion House speech, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer speaks on the state of the British economy. I know I'm mispronouncing that. Exchequer? I've seen that word several times. I don't know. St. Bartholomew's Hospital, the Royal Hospital of St. Bartholomew, is the oldest hospital in all of London. It was built in the year 1123 by traveling entertainer turned Anglo-Roman monk named Rahir. The story goes that Rahir fell ill while on a pilgrimage to Rome and vowed to found a hospital if he survived and returned home safely. You know that old story. The number of hospitals built that way is sounding. The most notorious physician to work at St. Bartholomew was Dr. Rodrigo Lopez, appointed to the hospital in 1562. He would go on to become Queen Elizabeth's chief physician. He was arrested in 1594 for attempting to poison the Queen. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered in June of that year. The scandal, combined with Lopez's Judaism, reignited a trend of Jewish villains in theater, including a rival of Christopher Marlowe's The Tragedy of the Rich Jew of Malta, and most notably William Shakespeare's writing of The Merchant of Venice. When the cholera epidemic hit London in 1831, St. Bartholomew's Hospital refused to admit cholera patients. You know you're in bad shape when even the hospital says no thank you. Instead, cholera patients were kept in a nearby house, which was demolished following the outbreak. A medical school was built in as an extension of the hospital a few years later. The facilities were state of the art and featured a library, medical and chemical theaters, an anatomy museum, and dissection rooms. Fun. St. Paul's Cathedral, the earliest church built on the site with the name of St. Paul, dates back to 604 CE. It was made of wood and burned down 71 years later. Subsequent churches were likewise wooden and likewise consumed by fire until the chaplain to William the Conqueror built the cathedral out of the stone in 1087. The building will survive for another 600 years. It Almost like stone is inflammable, Bloch was a bloody genius. St. Paul's Cathedral was originally a place of Catholic worship and a center of public activity. Trading took place in the cathedral as well as the games of sport, despite the objections from those in charge of the cathedral. When Henry VIII severed the ties of the Catholic Church, St. Paul became the Protestant cathedral, and although it went back to the Catholic worship under Mary, Queen of Scots, St. Paul's became the Protestant once and for all under Queen Elizabeth in 1559. Efforts to restore the St. Paul's were delayed time and time again, as such events as the English Civil War and the Great Fire of 1666, which claimed the cathedral as one of the many casualties. Legendary architect Christopher Wren was only in his 30s, was hired to redesign the St. Paul's Cathedral before it was destroyed by the Great Fire, and he engineered the design and construction of a new revitalized cathedral. By the 19th century, St. Paul had once again lost its luster. Queen Victoria remarked that the cathedral was dreary, dingy, and undevotional. Funds were raised to improve the cathedral by such philanthropists as Maria Hackett and William Weldon Champneys, but not Crawford Starrick. Interesting. Temple Church. The Temple Church was the early place of the worship for the favored people, the Knights Templar. The round nave and the trademark of the church was built in 1185 and was consecrated by Heraclius, the Patriarch of Jerusalem. The church was originated part of a larger... Sorry, I got a message. My wife's mom dragged her to a store, even though she's not feeling well. My wife does have a number of health problems. Seems everybody, including myself in this family, has them. Amazing. Okay, where was I? The church was originally part of a larger mosaic complex that included residences, military training grounds, and places for recreation. The Knights Templar uses the Church of Initiation ceremonies, which would be held in a crypt beneath the nave. No doubt these ceremonies were creepy as hell. The church also served as a bank for nobility, and this combined with the influx of gifts from the royal family made the Knights Templar very wealthy in the 10th and 11th centuries. The first known refurbishment of the church took place in the 17th century by English architect Christopher Wren. Wren installed an organ and an altar screen in the church, but more notably, he whitewashed the church's paintings and applied plaster to the marble columns in an attempt to fit aesthetic tastes of the time. Wren work was largely undone in 1841 when the church was restored by the architect Sidney Smythe, Smirk, Smirky, I'm assuming Smirk, and Decimus Burton. Don't they sound like a musical hall double act? Please welcome the comedy songs of Smirk and Burton. Smirk and Burton's work gave the church a Victorian Gothic look that not only fit the taste of the time, but fit closely with the church's original design. It was Smirk's intention to return the church to its original ideal Templar form. Tower of London. Plenty has gone on at the Tower of London that you would want to keep off an estate agent's listing. Torture, murder, and whatnot. But the complex itself had become a little more than a tourist attraction by the end of the 19th century. That changed when Britain entered the Great War in 1914. The tower was used to train soldiers and house the prisoners of war. Blood was spilled at the Tower of London for the first time in over 150 years as 12 German spies were executed by firing squad between 1914 and 1915. The first to be executed, a man named Karl Hans Lodi, whatever, reportedly left a note thanking his captors for their hospitality and even shook hands with each member of the firing squad before his execution. Can you imagine that? Just, somebody shake your hand, you're going to kill me here in a minute, but you're cool, you're nice, whatever. Southwark, London Bridge Station. London Bridge Station is the oldest railway terminus in London and has a history of corporate competition, partnership, and dissolution. The original station was opened in 1836 by the London and Greenwich Railway, also known as LGR. It was simple in design and not very large, but the LGR used its prime location to lease the line and station to its competitors who sought to access London through the station. By 1840, four different train companies were paying the LGR to use its line. One competitor, the London Croydon Railway, LCR, built its own station adjacent to that of the LGR and eventually merged with the competing railways using LGR station. The Almal... Hold on. Okay. The amalgamated The amalgamated companies, which would later call South of London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway, completed their coup by taking over the LGR station in 1844, demolishing the station and rebuilding it all with the same year. You're welcome, incredibly specific 19th century regional railway company. Fact fans, I do this for you. Lambeth Asylum. While Bethlehem Royal Hospital, also known as Bedlam, is an asylum for the association with the cruelty towards patients. The institution had largely curbed its behavior in the early 19th century, following some shocking exposés. England's other notorious asylum, Broadmoor, opened in Berkshire in 1863, taking some of Bethlehem's patients. In the process, Lambeth Asylum, on the other hand, was largely undocumented for the course of its short life. Patients are identified by the numbers rather than names, and the records of treatments administered there are vague. Letters and contracts are, at the time, suggest the building were designed by the architect Arthur Hayes, his first and only project in 1850. A newspaper expert from 1851 tells us that Hayes was murdered in his bed by his own son, who believed his father to be the Antichrist. A claim later proved to be inaccurate. Arthur Hayes Jr. would later be admitted to Lambeth as a patient. Lambeth Asylum closed its doors in January of 1869 and was demolished later that year, no doubt due to the death of the sole benefactor, Crawford Stark. Okay. The Thames. I think Thames, something like that. No, it's not pronounced how it's spelled. I'll just keep calling it the Thames. Blackfriars Bridge. This crossing was originally meant to be named Pitt Bridge in honor of the former Prime Minister William Pitt the Elder, but the name was never caught on. Blackfriars Bridge was built from 1760 to 1769. The Scottish engineer Robert Mylan had lasted almost 100 years, requiring frequent repairs due to the subpar limestone used in the construction. It was torn down in 1864 when the government determined it would be more cost-effective to simply replace the bridge than to keep repairing it. The new bridge, which was still standing, was designed by Thomas Cubitt and completed in 1869. In his Dickens Dictionary of London, published 10 years later, Charles Dickens Jr. described the Blackfriars Bridge as one of the handsomest in London. If celebratory magazines were all around back then, Blackfriars would have been called the sexiest bridge alive. Lambeth Bridge. Before there was Lambeth Bridge, there was a horse ferry that ran between Lambeth Palace and Westminster. The horse ferry dates back as early as 1513 when it was owned by Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop was stripped of his possessions, including the ferry, during the English Civil War, and as the war went on, the ferry became an important crossing for Parliament to control and keep supporters of the King of Westminster. The horse ferry went out of business in 1750 when Westminster Bridge was built nearby, but Lambeth Bridge was built on the site of the original horse ferry in 1860. Designed by Peter W. Barlow to be a toll bridge, the steep approaches on either side inadvertently discouraged horse-drawn carriages from using Lambeth Bridge. The bridge ceased to charge tolls when it was brought to the Metropolitan Board of Works in 1877. Lambeth Bridge deteriorated fairly quickly. The suspension cables and the girders began rusting a decade after construction and was rebuilt in 1832. I'm sad this entry is finished. I love the word horse ferry. I'll try to use it more in my day-to-day life, but unless I buy a horse to move near water, it seems unlikely to happen. Sad face. The Strand. I got some entries here. Alhambra Music Hall. Back in 1854, this was the home of the scientific institute known as the Royal Panopticon of Science and Art. Apparently, science was a bit of a bore for most people back then because the institution went bankrupt years later. The building was purchased by E.T. Smith, the famous circus proprietor. He added a circus ring to the interior, and for a time, the Panopticon became the Alhambra Circus. Smith changed tactics in 1860, converting the circus to a theater and renaming the whole thing the Alhambra Music Hall. The Alhambra was one of the first music halls in London to compete with what was considered legitimate theater. Rather than presenting a dramatic narrative, music hall performances were made up of multiple different acts, including singing, dancing, and magic. One show could have gone on as many as 20 acts and run up to 4 hours long. Oh, those are the best evenings, aren't they? These performers often played in multiple music halls over the course of a single night and would run into the carriage and speed to another hall as soon as the act was finished, just to perform it again elsewhere. The building itself was designed by architect T. Hayter Lewis and inspired by Indo-Islamic architecture of British India. Lewis gave the building such distinguished features as twin minarets and conical roof and a great domed rotunda. And I think I am going to wrap up reading this crap from here. My wife will actually be home soon. I read almost 100 entries. Fantastic. Um, she does not like me on microphone for some reason, and I honestly don't know why. So I am going to stop the stream because it will go back to my usual no commentary, which is unfortunate. So, bye bye.